Hello, well today I'm going to be sewing my shoe parts together, and great fun this, but you begin to see a shoe taking shape. I'm going to be sewing essentially a back end and a front end, and then I will join those both together. So taking the front end, I have my toe and I've got my vamp. I'll sew those together, and then separately I will sew the back of the shoe to the 2 quarters either sides there, and then I'll bring the 2 parts together. Now as far as lining goes, because I have to sort of think ahead all the time with all of this, of the steps, the lining will be fixed in by a row of stitching going around the top here, and it will otherwise in the shoe in theory lie flopping down. And the reason for that is I need to get a stiffener in for the heel, and maybe on the sides, but definitely the heel, and I need to get a stiffener in on the toe cap, and I need to be able to get it up between the lining and the outer in each case. So I wouldn't want stitches going around there. Also, you're going to be pulling all of this over a last, and so you need to have it fairly free flowing. I may well, I noticed on 1 or 2 shoes I was looking at, they do sometimes stitch them down this seam in the middle each side, and I will probably do that to sort of hold the lining in vertically, for want of a better word, midway in the shoe. So first off, I'm going to do the little pinch seam at the back of the shoe here, and on my pattern I've got it marked in. So what I've done, I've just put a couple of little pin dots to mark the top and the bottom. So I'm going to cut up here, and then I will fold it over and mark where my stitch line will go. Something like that. It's not a lot, but it's enough to give it a little bit of a tuck in there. So this is the sewing machine I'll be using for most of the work on this. It's a Singer 331K, so it's very much like the Singer 31K, and I've put a little roller foot on it. I featured this in other videos, the conversion, etc. I'm using a very fine bonded nylon thread for the sewing, and it's an NM40, that's European thread measurement, NM40 sized thread. So basically it's a pretty fine one. There are metric, conversion tables on the web, so if you are in the US you can look up your equivalent with those tables. I'll bring the camera around and you can see I've got a very fine needle. It's actually a size 80 needle in here, so really a bit slimmer than you'd normally use on the thread, but it will give a very fine hole, and it's a leather point needle. I've got a fairly fine stitch on this. I'm guessing it's possibly under 12 stitches an inch. It's certainly pretty fine. So I've got my stitch line. I've cut very close up to that stitch line, and what I'm going to do now is gently hammer it down. I want to try and get it as flat as I can, so I'm using sort of the round end of my anvil, and I've got a little cobbler's hammer here. It's one which has a rounded face doming off, so it's actually a domed face. It needs a bit of a clean really, but I can just go along here and start to tap that all down. I've now got that pretty flat. Get rid of this little extraneous thread, which is what I wanted, and that's what it's like on the back. Okay, next up I'm going to sew my toe cap to the actual vamp, and I'm going to just put a sort of like a guideline around here lightly on the leather to make sure that I get this going back enough that I get it just behind like both the seams. So to mark it, I've got these dividers set just over where I think the seam's going, and I'm just going to very lightly touch it round on here. So I'll get some glue along this next and glue this on here. Now this part I'm going to do flat. I have tried it over my last and the position doesn't seem to change, but I know when I do the back, because I have just tried placing that over my last with the quarters, if I'm not careful the positioning will change, because you're going from sort of like 1 dimension into, or 2 dimension into 3 dimensions. So I will make sure with the back and the quarters that I fix them on here and then glue them. But with this I'm just going to do it flat. There's plenty of allowance around. I can stretch this to an extent because it's a big bit of leather. So again, I'm using this Aquilim 315. So that's the glue I'm using. Water-based, doesn't fume, seems very nice to use. Trying to be careful not to get the glue too much around the holes. The glue does dry clear, so it doesn't notice too much. One can also, using a fine awl, try and get it out of the sort of holes where it does go into a hole. It's very difficult not to have it going into holes. Got my little glue pot here, which is quite good for keeping it, the brush sort of fresh all the time and the glue fresh. So glue goes transparent and then I can join. Like that, I've got that glued ready for sewing. So this seam in here, it's been skived, so it's nice and flush, and I've just hammered that down. So I'm now going to stitch these 2 parts together. Taking my time. I've put a speed reduction on this machine. So I've got the back of the shoe at the moment, the actual heel back, and then the 2 quarter panels. And what I've been doing, I've been putting them on the last and getting them into position, and then putting masking tape on the outside to hold them roughly in position. I then turn them over and I've put some of my glue down, and that's just going off now. So I can start to press that together, and this will basically glue up the back. It was quite tricky getting it over the last, because what I essentially was doing was trying to get it in the right sort of position, if you can imagine that crudely, and then taping it where I felt it should go. I think my last, if I'm being honest here, is a bit undercut around here, so ideally I think I'll be having a larger proper size last. I'm making my life more difficult, but there you are, it's all part of the journey. And I'm just about to stitch up my second heel piece, back of my shoe. I'm finding with stitching the broguing that it pays to do the outside edge first, as you can get the sort of distance from the little pinking marks. Where you have to sometimes turn quite quick and tight. Line number 2 next, and I find it pays to have the needle and the wheel this side of the work so that you can see the width of your stitch. Well, there you are, starting to look sort of shoe-like. So what I've done at the moment, I've sewn the toe onto the vamp, and I've sewn the quarters onto the back, but I haven't sewn it across the middle yet. And the reason for that is I want to get some lining done in places first, and I want to get the eyelets and reinforcing done for the laces. So I'll do that in the next video, and then I'll be sewing the front to the back. But anyway, making progress, beginning to look vaguely shoe-like. A little bit concerned that my last isn't quite tall enough. I may need to bulk it up or something, I'll see. Anyway, the journey will continue, and if you want to follow it, please subscribe. Anyway, see you in the next video. Bye bye then.